So I'm late to the party because I was traveling over Memorial Day weekend, but I finally got to see Mission Impossible Final Reckoning with my mom. And is this the satisfying finale that the series deserves, or is it just another overlong chapter in the saga? Let's talk about it. Welcome to Real Talk with Jenabeth, and let's talk about Mission Impossible The Final Reckoning, the eighth installment of the amazing Mission Impossible franchise, and what is presumably being billed as the final chapter of Ethan Hunt's story. This movie is a direct continuation of Dead Reckoning Part 1, and yes, they dropped the Part 2 label and rebranded this as Final Reckoning. It picks up with Ethan and his team going after the Entity, a rogue AI that has essentially become the most dangerous threat to mankind. Think nuclear codes, total tech takeover, and a very real possibility of global annihilation. So starting off with the good, the action sequences in Final Reckoning are top tier. I mean, Tom Cruise continues to defy age, gravity, and probably insurance policies. The submarine sequence and the biplane stunt are definitely standout sequences in this movie for sure. And you know what? This time I appreciate that the marketing department did not overexpose these stunts as much as I felt like they overexposed the motorcycle stunt for Dead Reckoning, because I think they held enough back in the marketing that when you're in the theater, you're actually seeing a lot of footage, a lot of scenes that don't play out in the marketing, so it still feels fresh, and I really appreciated that. The practical effects and on-location sets of these stunt sequences just feel so visceral and real, and you can tell that this is not on a green screen and that Tom Cruise is literally risking his life for our entertainment. You don't get to see that on the big screen very often. Aside from shooting on location and the practical effects, we always get a great performance from Tom Cruise as Ethan Hunt. Hayley Atwell gets another time to shine as Grace, but my favorite new standout character that was introduced in this film is Tremel Tillman. He plays the submarine captain and he brings a grounded charisma that really pops. Now let's move on to what did not work, starting with the runtime and the pacing. This movie clocks in at around 3 hours, and you do feel it. As many people have said, the first half is a lot of exposition, and normally I don't really care a whole lot about that if it's done craftfully and executed well. But in my opinion, it was not very streamlined. The story is a bit convoluted because they try to make this a full circle finale by tying in threads from earlier films, even going back to the original Mission Impossible from 1996. And I do think maybe that callback worked, but I don't think all of the callbacks landed. I get that they were trying to go for the culmination of all these other Mission Impossible films leading up to this, in a way kind of being an homage to the franchise itself. But I think that the problem that you run into with this is whenever you're calling back earlier films that were always meant to be standalone projects and didn't really lean themselves to interconnected storytelling, these plot threads from previous films that you're trying to shoehorn in here feel pretty forced and not very organic. It would be one thing if it was, for example, like the MCU, where you have this through line that you've been able to see the little crumbs leading up to it the whole time with every film. That's a bit more satisfying. But in the case of Mission Impossible Final Reckoning, a lot of these films were meant to be standalone projects, and now they're acting like, things that we once thought were the way they were really aren't. And sometimes that might land in some cases, but for me, it didn't really work. So because of this storytelling decision, what you end up with is a lot of exposition in the first half and a much slower pacing plot to get through before the second half really starts to pick up. Another negative for me is Ethan Hunt's team in this film just don't feel as cohesive and charming as other installments like Ghost Protocol or Fallout. They just kind of fall flat. And tonally with this film, because the stakes are so high, it is actually very somber and very serious. There's not a whole lot of levity in the film. There's not as much humor in it. And because of that, it just feels really heavy. And tonally, I think that's what they were going for. But as someone that likes some of the added humor that doesn't cheapen the experience, but just adds a little levity to it in previous Mission Impossible films, it also just made the overall experience of this one a bit less enjoyable. And I'm pretty sure that there was a backstory with Luther that was maybe cut out due to time, because there was something about his character that felt like it needed a bit more of a payoff. But it fell flat because I think they had to probably cut down whatever that subplot must have been. So we do get Gabriel again in this film, who was the villain in Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning, who is kind of the puppet of the true villain, which is the AI entity. But I think something that you just run into when it comes to this AI storyline that's unavoidable is, because the AI is not like a physical person, the threat just doesn't have as much texture in terms of having some personification. And I do understand that Gabriel is kind of this representation of being the puppet of the AI, but Gabriel's character, I think he's a good villain, but I wouldn't call him great because he does come off as a bit cartoonish at times. This movie is still entertaining and worth seeing in theaters if you can for the action alone, but it is not the strongest story that this series has told. In terms of my rating for this film, this is where things get tricky. As far as Mission Impossible movies go, Mission Impossible Final Reckoning is mid. But as far as overall Hollywood films and film experiences, this film is giving. Be sure to scroll down and leave a comment on this video. I'm going to be pinning a comment that has my ranking of all 8 of the Mission Impossible movies, including Final Reckoning, which is toward the bottom, spoilers. But if you want to check out my ranking video of the previous 7 Mission Impossible movies that was recently posted, I'll put that in the description below so you can find it and hear my thoughts about each one. It's definitely my favorite action franchise, so be sure to check that out. I will be posting a YouTube short of my out of theater reaction of the Lilo and Stitch live action this weekend, so be sure to subscribe for that, and I'll catch you next time for more Real Talk.